Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power of Man podcast. My name is Rory Paquette. You guys all know that at this point. I am your very grateful host, and I could not be happier to be here. I want to throw a big shout out to everybody out there. When we made the jump to 5 times a week, you guys you met that with vim and vigor, man. You guys have really come through. The Power of Man Army has just stepped up, and I want to thank every one of you for the likes, the subscribes, the shares, all the comments. And I mean, the last couple episodes we've had up, you guys, we've had hundreds of comments, and I appreciate the support like you will never know. So, uh, I hope that one of the reasons why you do that is because we keep bringing on interesting and powerful, men, guests that come on here and tell great stories. This story today is going to knock your socks off. We have an author with us today who sent me the book ahead of time, and I'm not done with it, full disclosure, but it's been difficult as a father to get through. And folks, you need to buy this book. You need to hear this man out, and I think you're gonna really enjoy this episode. So, that being said, before I introduce this guy and we take off running, you all know what we got to do. We got to pay a couple of bills. So let's hit our sponsor today. Take a sip of my preferred beverage. Ooh, and I just made it too. It's like piping hot. Good stuff. There it is. And you guys all know what we're drinking. It's Freedom Hill Coffee. At Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Go check them out. Deep, dark, rich, bold, beautiful. Just like my wife. They brew a mean cup of Joe. It's a mean bean. And they do all the right things for all the right reasons. They support veterans, which is why we support them the way that we do. You guys all know how important veterans are to this show here at Power Man. And that's why we support Freedom Hill Coffee. Go look them up at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Tell them Power Man sent you. One more, because I don't know if I can keep up with this guy over here. He's like skiing and, killing it. So,
I talk fast too.
and he's ready to go. Here we go. Please welcome father, author, adventurer, author of Without Restraint, Robert DeLena. DeLena?
Yeah, perfect.
Should have
Yeah.
checked with you
Either are
beforehand.
acceptable. Half the family says it one way, half the family says it the other way. So I accept either. But Delane is fine. Delane is fine.
DeLena. All right, Robert DeLena. Robert, this book is incredible. And I,
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for sending it to me
My pleasure.
ahead of time. Usually I have to go out and buy them and try and, get it done. But this is about you and your son, Ryan. It's one heck of a story. I'm not even going to attempt to lead into it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to you, sir, and try and keep up with you. So, Robert, tell everybody who you are, what this is all about, why you're here, and give us your story, brother.
Well, thank you first for having me, Rory. And studying the book was a pleasure. Book writing, if you're into it for money reasons, it's probably barking up the wrong tree. I mean, we wrote this as a labor of love, and it was really to get my son's message out. And so I'm happy to share it with anybody. And if anybody wants a copy, I'll send it to you. Honestly, I mean, I'm happy to have you buy it, but really, it's more important that we get the message out. And as we get into the story, I think you'll see why. My name is Rob DeLena. I was born in Revere, Massachusetts, which is right outside of Boston. I was, kind of a Italian, Irish, blue collar kid. My father worked for the state, and he worked, at the Boston Garden parking lot. He parked cars. My mother worked at the airport. They stressed education. I was a really good baseball player as a kid. I sort of leveraged that into some great education. I went to boarding school on a scholarship. I went to Trinity College on a scholarship. And I think went on to law school and had, sort of was living the American dream. My wife had a similar story. She kind of grew up the hard way in outside of Philadelphia and went to the same college and law school and professionally, I think everything went according to plan. We were both where we thought we would be. Then this kid comes along, Ryan, our first child, our son. And when he was born, he was perfect. I mean, he was just the smartest baby. He would never stop moving. He was, hungry. His eyes never stopped moving. They darted around the room. You could just tell he was taking it all in. But he always wanted to do the next thing. Like, as soon as he put his head up, he wanted to crawl. And then as soon as he crawled, he wanted to walk. And then he wanted to run. And we couldn't cage him in. We put him in this baby jail and he would break out of it. He just was one of these kids that never listened. And he loved not listening. You could see he was, he got more, enthusiastic the more you said no. It was really, it fueled him. So he was a fun kid to parent. He was hard, but he was fun. And it wasn't until he got to school where things started to, kind of unravel. We live in a, now we had moved to this sort of fancy suburb outside of Boston called Sudbury, Mass. And we picked this fancy preschool where you had to, get on the list when Mary Beth was pregnant. And we put Ryan in there for one day, and they asked us to come back the next day and meet with us and said, this was like a summer camp when he was 2 years old. It wasn't even really preschool, and said, we see some things, we're concerned, we want to have a pediatric neuropsychologist observe him, and is that okay? And we had been told early on by some people who had observed him that he was gifted. So we went from thinking he was headed off to Harvard to all of a sudden we have this neuropsychologist observing him, and so she came the next day and she watched him play, and she met with us after, and tell the story in the book that she took this piece of paper and drew an oval and bisected it down the middle and said, Ryan's really smart in the left half of his brain and really weak in the right half of his brain. And this imbalance is causing him to have these emotional outbursts when he doesn't get his way. And he was a high-strung kid. He was, if he didn't get his way, he was tough. So, we sort of listen and think, okay, and I'm going to fast forward because I'm talking too long, but
You're fine.
we
You're fine.
eventually sort of pushed him from private school into the town cooperative preschool, which was a mix of special needs kids. I'm going to use that term because that's the term they used back then,
Okay.
and um, and typically developing kids. And the hope was that the kids who were having issues would sort of would use the other kids as modeling for modeling, and that made sense. Except in Ryan's case, most of the special needs, quote unquote, kids were developmentally delayed. They were kids who were, they hadn't talked yet. They were, they weren't really aggressive like he was, and he would just, tear up the room, and he would search the room for, light bulbs that were out or leaky pipes, or he'd have his head under the sink. He just was a really curious kid, and you could tell that this preschool really didn't want to deal with him because he was hard. And so, through a series of
Mm.
meetings with the neuropsychologist, we end up getting pushed into a therapeutic school. And that's the crux of the story. That's when sort of the rubber meets the road here. We're both educated, we were both lawyers at the time. We trusted these experts who said, all right, this kid, at the time, the autism spectrum had just started to come out, and they weren't really using that term. He wasn't really autistic. He wasn't Asperger's. He just was, he was a little different. And so, we wanted to fix him because he didn't fit in where everybody else fit, where everybody
Yeah.
else fit. So we listened and we put him in this therapeutic school. And in the therapeutic school, we were told had a lot of things we liked. I mean, there were small classes and they previewed and transitioned, and it was an individualized education plan for him. But the one thing that they sort of, kind of glossed over was that when he became dysregulated, as they said, they would hold him, they would hug him, they would put their arms around him. And, I remember having that little, hair stare in the back of your neck, like, all right, I guess that makes sense. But the way that played out, and then I'm going to throw it back to you, is he was restrained multiple times a day at the school. They would kind of tackle him and put him sort of face down on the floor. And the reason I know this is because they trained us on how to do it at home. And we would sort of get behind him and you'd kind of bear hug him and hold on to him until he kind of really
Mm.
just fought his way past where what he was mad about, but it would play out over like 20 minutes, and he would be wiggling and and as he got a little older, it really became more like a wrestling match. And so we did it at home for a couple of years, and I realized the folly of it, and I was like, my blood pressure would get up. I want to win this wrestling match, and then I would try to remember why I was on the floor with him to begin with, because I didn't remember why he got in, maybe he knocked his sister's blocks over or something, and all of a sudden we're wrestling on the floor, we started to have sort of really misgivings about it. We went back to the school and said, we think this is not working. Can
Yeah.
we try something else? And they really didn't have anything else. I mean, once you're in this therapeutic system, that really is the way they kind of modulate the kid's behavior, is the threat of a timeout, and then if the timeout doesn't work, it's the threat of restraint. So, you know, just I'll end with, for the next 4 years, his life was really a living hell. I mean, he was restrained between the age of 4 and 8, probably 10, 12 times a day at school. We
Mm.
would get
Yeah.
reports about it, but remember, we were really hearing from him what was going on at school, and we just thought he was exaggerating. And then, as he got to more like, that eight range, when you could really trust what he was telling you, we realized what a big mistake we had made. We never should have sent him there to begin with, but we just couldn't fix it.
Sure. Well, I mean, you don't know any better. You're just doing what the experts are telling you, right? How many years ago was this? Because how old is your son now?
So Ryan will be 24 in May. So he probably went into those schools around 2004. He would have been 3 years old, I guess. 2004, 2005. I think fall 2005, I think was when he went into the first school.
Okay.
And there's like it was almost like I described in the book, like having a criminal record, because once he went into a therapeutic school, when we went back to our town and said, "Hey, we think this isn't really working out. Can we just put him back in public school?" They looked and they said, well, no, we can't because he has all of these, physical episodes. He has all these restraints and he
Right.
can't come back to public school. And I, try to say, well, the only reason he has those is because they can do it. If you didn't do it, then he wouldn't have, and they just wouldn't have it. He had a one-to-one aide as well. And so they had really, kind of dug their heels in and said, let's try another therapeutic school. And so we
Right.
tried a second one, and then we tried a third one, it's I can keep going on about the therapeutic schools, but I want to hear from you if you want to keep going down that road, or if there's more specific questions I can answer.
Honestly, I don't want you to worry about me right now, okay? Because, and I appreciate the courtesy. I really do. Your story is amazing what you've been through. And unfortunately, going through the difficulty, the part you're talking about right now, is such a huge part of the story. Even just that long ago was like the dark ages compared to where everything is now. But even now, if you're not questioning what's going on and really advocating for your own kid, you have to, then you brought up a great point right there where they get labeled and then they get funneled.
Yeah.
And, I've seen this just, I coached for a long time in, a bunch of different sports because of my boys. And whenever I would have, any sort of, young, player come in who had any kind of developmental disability of any kind, then there was like a training session you had to go through. And all they ever told us was make sure you don't lay hands on them.
Yeah, it's
And then I
true.
hear I hear that advice, which I
I
know
know.
was from before that, of tackle him, bring him down to the floor, and restrain him. And I'm just like,
Yeah,
I
it's
can't
true.
believe what you all had to go through, including
I
your
know.
son.
But the comment I get a lot when people read the book is, "Oh, this doesn't go on anymore, right?" Like that was back then. And I say, "Of course it does," because
Yeah,
and to defend the system for a second, if you have a kid who's completely out of control, and a lot of these kids, especially at the therapeutic schools, are, they may be nonverbal or they may have other issues. They may have been abused. All kinds of things, right? We
right,
saw the gamut of kids who had been through the ringer. And if that kid is getting physical and is going to hurt themselves or hurt someone else, they don't have a choice, right? But they always have that in their bag to say, anytime a kid is dysregulated, the least little bit dysregulated, they can say, well, they were a threat to themselves or a threat to someone else. And you
right,
really can't counter that unless you have video evidence, or in Ryan's case, as he got older and he could really describe what led to the restraint. And when we were really trying to negotiate with the schools and say, all right, he was upset. Yes, he tore up his homework. He was being a jerk even. We'll admit that. What did you do then? Oh, well, we tried to put him in a timeout. He refused the timeout, so we had to restrain him. And I would say, at home when we stopped restraining, I started to be creative, and I'm naturally very funny, and I would use my sense of humor, sarcasm. I would just try to make him laugh, and it would disarm him for that 1 second. And all of a
right,
sudden, we were just diffused. We could talk. Because Ryan was the kind of kid, like in the moment, he just couldn't get there. He was just too upset. 20 minutes later, an hour later, he'd come back to you and say, Dad, I'm sorry I threw that. I was just mad about something. It was, I shouldn't have done that. But in the moment, if I would butt heads with him and I would meet his anger with anger, we
hmm
would get nowhere. And it took me a long time to realize that. It really did. And it's because it was counterintuitive in a way. The dad's in charge. I have to think like I'm going to lay down the law here. You have to do what I tell you to do. Why? Because I said so. Well, that's how I was parented, right? It's what we
right,
all, right? And it doesn't work with Ryan. I had to learn to be creative. Now, one part to the story that's kind of important, I think, I was working from home back then when no dads worked from home. I like no, this is, well, this is the dark. I used to be
right,
afraid to leave the house because I thought people would think I was unemployed. So I would stay in the house like during the day, like because I didn't want people to think I didn't have a job. But I just happened to have this job that worked from home. And so I was, in a lot of ways the mom when the kids came home from school, we had help, but I was the front line when things unraveled. And so I had to really relearn how to parent and say, the punishment and all this stuff, like it didn't work with him. I had to just kind of make it, let's just make somebody laugh, or let's just kind of have a silly moment and then just kind of reassess. All right, why did you do that to your sister? Why did you knock over? Well,
Right.
that wasn't nice. Can you apologize? Okay, yes, now I can apologize. So I had to relearn everything. The schools, however, they, you know, they have their system. They're built. A school is built around a model. To
Yeah.
get them to be creative and to look at this differently, I just could never get that. Right. And we tried three therapeutic schools. And the third one prided themselves on having this. It's called it collaborative problem solving. It's this whole model of like negotiating with kids and having set rules, that like safety and security, like you can't negotiate, but these things in the middle, they were supposed to give the kids some wins so that it wasn't always this authoritarian structure. It sounded great. They didn't do any of that. It was a traditional model of like, they had an isolation room that they would throw Ryan in and lock him in. Now at this point, he's like, 13, 14, 15. And that was as upsetting. And we had a therapist in the mix at that point saying, that's as bad as the restraint. You're locking in a room and you're not telling him when he can get out. And so imagine it's like being a hostage, right? If you're a
Right.
prisoner and you know you have a 3-year sentence, you know you have a 3-year sentence. If you get locked in a room and nobody tells you when you're going to get out, it's really emotionally taxing. And so it took until junior year of high school to get him back to public school. And finally they just, I think, gave in to me because I was starting to become difficult within the town, and I was getting real more vocal at these meetings and being kind of a jerk because I knew that was the only way they were going to react. They would only respond to that. So,
Yeah.
and finally they let him back in on a 45-day evaluation, and I think they thought he was going to last a minute, at this point. But I knew once all that stuff was removed, he would be fine. He was going to be a struggle socially, and he was going to have to fit into a big high school all of a sudden without having ever been in the town school system. And I knew that there would be moments like that would be hard for him, but I knew he wasn't going to, the police weren't going to get called or he wasn't going to hurt anybody. Like it was, but I think that's what the town thought. It was frustrating, because I just could never make them see that he was a much different kid than they thought. Because, that the die was cast when he was 4 years old, and that's the
Right.
crazy thing. They just decided this kid was a threat, and kind of to advance the story. Meanwhile, we're having this whole other life with skiing, and the way the skiing sort of plays in. When Ryan was 7 years old, I just out of desperation, I took him to this local ski hill. I used to take him to Home Depot or all these places just to like get him out of the house when he was being difficult. And one day I couldn't go to Home Depot again because I'd always leave there with some $200 saw because he would make me buy it, and I'm not very handy. I had all these tools I didn't never use, so I just threw him in the car, and we'd driven by this little hill, occasionally for birthday parties and stuff. I must have just had it in the back of my head, or it was divine providence. I don't know, whatever it was. Something drove me to that we had no plan. I didn't even tell him where we were going. I hadn't skied in 25 years. I skied a couple times as a kid. And I didn't think we'd get through the rental process. And, he couldn't wait for anything. Like I was thinking about the lines, and I just was desperate. And we get through the rental process. All of a sudden we're flopping on our little skis and we're trying to walk toward the magic carpet, which is this like airport people mover that goes up the little bunny hill. And I throw him on that and we get to the top, and I didn't think we'd get that far. So all of a sudden we're standing on top, and I hadn't told him anything about like how to ski. And I start describing like you're turning like a bike, like make your shoulders turn, which is like the exact opposite of what you should do. And Ryan was really athletic and he had great balance and he used to climb everything. And he just looked at me and he shot straight down the hill and he banked this turn back into the line. And I remember thinking, how the hell did he do that? He doesn't know what he's doing. And then I kind of fumbled my way down. And of course, he had cut the line. So I had to pull him back to the back of the line. And he never liked to wait, but he really wanted to do it again. So he was willing to wait because he wanted to do it. And we left there that day. I told the story a lot, but I remember thinking that wasn't terrible. Like nothing bad happened. We should do that again. So we went back the next day, and then we went to a bigger local Massachusetts mountain the next weekend, New Hampshire the weekend after that, Vermont the weekend after that. We found ourselves in Vail, a couple months later, and we started traveling the country, and he got really good really fast. I was terrible. He would always want to do the hardest runs at every resort, and I was like life or death. And a couple times I fell, and I would say to him, Right, I have 9 lives. I think I'm down to like 4. Like you. we have I have to get better or we're gonna have a problem. And so, but little by little, I got a little better, and we had these great experiences, not just on the mountain where he was skiing, and that's the part people couldn't understand. We were traveling together. We were sitting on chairlifts forever. We would have these conversations, and it was the one place number one, I couldn't restrain him. There was no threat of that. He wasn't going to get in trouble, and it was the first place, Rory, where risk was rewarded. You know, like all his life, it was Ryan, get down from there. Ryan, get off the tree. Ryan, you can't do that, Ryan. You can't, don't touch your sister, and all of a sudden he's in this place where every quote unquote crazy thing he did, people would clap. They were like, "Look at that kid! Oh, he can do that. Or he's a great skier." I could see his confidence growing. And you coach.
Yeah.
When you have that feeling of like, I can do something maybe a little better than everybody else. He started to carry himself differently, and I knew if I could just get that Ryan into the schools and into his everyday life, we were onto something. It was really hard to merge the two though. It just didn't translate into school like I thought it would, or into life until much later. I mean, his confidence, certainly he was a different kid, I think, but I think he was always a kid that said, my life is really hard. I really struggle. And this is when he was in the therapeutic schools. My life is terrible. But
Yeah.
on Saturday, Dad's going to take me skiing, and I just got to make it to Saturday. And he describes that in the book. He just really needed to make it to Saturday, and we would have these great moments, and I think that was enough for him to get through the week. And it's sad to think that that's what his childhood. It makes me kind of tear up now thinking about it. That was his childhood, but that was his childhood. And I just want to throw one other piece that I think is important. Um, while you're facing all of these therapeutics, we were facing all these therapeutic schools. The other thing we faced was medication, and Ryan was on a lot of medication. And at any one time, he was on, two antipsychotics and a mood stabilizer. He was on Seroquel. He was on lithium, Prozac, and that, like the school decisions, we made willingly because experts told us this was going to help. And it's, one little pill started with a small dose. It's only a small dose. It's this, and then it was two, and then it was, oh, maybe we should change, or then we should switch, and oh, that had a side effect from that almost killed him. Oh, let's try this other one, you know, and then little by little we kind of went along with it, and you think, all right, he can't live without this, but I was seeing him without it because when we would go skiing, a lot of times I would forget to give it to him, or we would forget, and I'm like, I don't know if he needs it, but it just, I had a hard time convincing everyone else that he didn't need it. And finally, when he was about 15, he got a different psychiatrist who was one of these guys who just, like, from the start, it was like skeptical of every parenting decision we had ever made. And it was exactly what I wanted. He made us explain everything and defend everything. And we couldn't defend a lot of these decisions. So he said, why don't we try to take him off this medicine? Okay, so he took out the Seroquel, no change. All right, he took out the lithium, no change. Takes out the Prozac. This kid who was really athletic and gifted was
Mhm.
very heavy from all these meds. His body, he just blew up. And his cholesterol was off the charts. His blood pressure was off. And the psychiatrist was saying, does he need this to live? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if you didn't give him this medicine, would he kill himself or kill somebody? I'm like, no. Was it, why are you giving it to him then? I don't know. I mean, just little by little, it just kind of happened. And he said,
Right.
well, this medicine eventually is going to kill him. You know that, right? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, look at his physical health. He's not going to live past 30 or 40. And I was like, no one told us that. Like, they said there were side effects, but not those. And he said, well, what do you think, high blood pressure is or cholesterol is? Like, it's a side effect, but it's a side effect that get him off these meds. So I don't want to come off as anti-med. There are people who need medicine, and it does help, and I think it's critical to help people. But to give a prepubescent kid two antipsychotics and all these other things,
Wow.
it was not the way we was a big mistake. We made three big parenting mistakes: the medicine, the therapeutic schools, and there's a 2 week stint in a mental hospital that we never should have done. And then I can go into that, but that was the doozy of doozies. That one, that we could talk into that one, and that was finally the last straw for me. Like when we finally got out of there, like I took him skiing the next day to Utah, and I was like, Ryan, I'm not going to listen to anybody anymore. Like this is we made all these mistakes, and I own them in the book, and it was hard to relive them, but I just thank God he's not resentful, and he's not the kind of kid that looks back and says, if you hadn't done this, I would be fine. Like he's fine. He's become this great skier, adventure, outdoorsman. He's well known around New England and around the country, really. And he doesn't harbor any resentment. I don't know why. I think he should in some days, but he doesn't. Sorry, I really went long on that one, but
I really and truly it was fine. There's a lot to unpack in this last round of stuff. Let me just clarify for everybody. When did he start skiing? How old was he when he started skiing?
so I took him for the first time when he was 7.
7. Okay.
Yeah, and I remember the day. It was the January 2nd, 2009, and it was during Christmas break, and both kids are home. So he ran as a sister Abigail, who's 16 months younger, and we didn't have anything during these breaks except just trying to keep them from killing each other, and that would last till about 11 a.m. and then sure enough, someone would be crying, and I would just try to separate. My wife would take Abigail, and I would take Ryan, and I don't know, for whatever reason this day we drove to this place called Neshoba Valley Ski Resort, which is resort. It's just a little hill with a couple of lifts.
Nice. Very nice. Okay. So since then, have you been doing it weekly or did the weekly, sort of start later on?
Yeah, so right after that, he liked it right away, and I was so desperate. We tried every sport. I mean, he's so athletic, and I played college baseball. My wife played college lacrosse and field hockey, and I just thought he'd play something, and I tried everything, but he couldn't play team sports. And the frustration tolerance with losing or with even just swinging and miss or whatever, dropping the pass. He just so we tried a lot of individual sports, tennis and golf, and that was even more frustrating. He just couldn't deal with it. So I'd given up, frankly. I just, he was one of those kids that he probably should have been an Eagle Scout or something like that. He loved the outdoors and adventure, and he loved climbing trees and exploring. I kind of let him do a lot of that, but all of a sudden I got him on skis, and I was like, wow, he's really good at this, and he was just fearless. So and he was in the way his mind works, he could memorize the trail maps, and it doesn't sound important, but he would go to every mountain and he would know which runs he wanted to do and how to get to them. And I would argue with him because I'm an adult and say, no, I think it's that way. Sure enough, I'd figure out like he knew everything and I didn't know it. And then I was always worried we would separate because he was so little and he was so much better than me. But even the couple times we separated, he seemed to know what to do. He talked to ski patrol or he talked to somebody and say, I lost my dad and my dad fell and he's back there and can you help him? So he seemed like pretty mature about it. So we start going weekly. And then in New England, we could drive to New Hampshire pretty easily. So, we could do day trips to New Hampshire and come back. If we went for the weekend, Vermont's a little further, we'd go to Vermont. But then, he kind of, yeah, I don't know, he got the bug to just sort of start going out west, and there's just so much skiing out there, and this, it's amazing. And then for me, it was sort of, I don't know, I don't know, I was free of everything. All of a sudden, we were on these mountains, and it was hard to manage him, but there were moments when I'd look around and be like, this is pretty nice. This isn't a bad way to spend a Saturday. So we got really deep into it, and that was his thing. I mean, we just went all in, and when it would end in the spring, I could feel he would just, and I'd be like, all right, I got to come up with something in the summer. There's got to be something. And we tried things in the summer, but it was really tough. And in fact, that's why we went to Chile to ski because the Southern Hemisphere, it's winter when it's summer here. So we were going to Chile in July, in August, for like a week, 10 days, because it was 10 days of skiing, like so that I had that to kind of, it was the carrot and the stick during the summer and say, all right, we're going to go to Chile. And that was hard travel. Like international travel with a kid who was that age was tough.
Yeah.
And but it was worth it. It was it was expensive. I mean, we spent like I was spending like everything I earned. But when you have a kid with issues, and I don't know if your kids are struggle, but you get to this point where you're like, I just want him to be happy for 15 minutes. Like all of my dreams and hopes of Harvard, and he's going to be an investment banker or a doctor. Like I had thrown all that out the window, and it was like, I just want him to be happy for 15 minutes. And all of a sudden, I had this thing that he was happy all the time when he did it. Like it was very rarely did he have a bad moment on a ski resort. I mean, if a trail wasn't open or we got bad weather, like I could feel like this is a bad day, but those were few and far between. So like skiing was always just the one thing that made him happy, and if it made him happy, it made me happy. But then I kind of liked it too, so it actually did make me happy, and I got a little better at it, and It's a great sport. It makes the winter go by. Winter up here is rough, but I got to the point where I kind of looked forward to it when it would roll around, and I'd be sad when it ended.
For sure.
It was a cool thing.
The exponential benefits are clear too. It wasn't just the skiing. It was that helped him with so many other areas. And I know you mentioned a couple of them, but I guess by and large, what else did that impact? I mean, the fact that he could do this and he could let this out, and then you did have an effective, like you said, carrot on the stick. In what ways did that really help him kind of, improve or I don't even want to say improve, assimilate maybe, have a little easier time?
Yeah, I think all of those. I mean, I think you know, we debated homeschooling, Ryan, at certain points because school was so hard. But I always thought it would deny him the social aspect. He really craved friendship. He really wanted to be liked. He wanted to have friends. And these at the therapeutic schools, most of the kids in the therapeutic schools had come out of the foster care system and they were really regulated as to what they could do friendship wise. Like they couldn't have play dates. They couldn't go over to people's houses. I mean, it was
Sure.
it was really hard. And they were a lot of them had really had terrible lives. I mean, they'd come out of terrible circumstances. So they were all, damaged. I hate to use that word, but they were damaged in a lot of ways. And he had trouble forming friendships. So all of a sudden with skiing, you know, from an educational standpoint, it was he learned the geography of the United States. He learned about snow science. He learned about weather. He learned about travel. He learned about checking into hotels. He learned, it was like he's absorbing all of this. And then he starts meeting people through the internet. Like he started posting videos and he would, and I'm like, one of these, like, who's this guy? Like, what, like,
Right.
and it's like, oh no, he's 15. All right, he's going to be in Utah when we're there. I'm like, all right, that sounds okay, but I want to meet him first, like I was very skeptical. But sure enough, like people started sort of like, meeting us when we'd go ski places and it gave him a connection, I think, to the outside world and to this whole group of kids who were kind of like him, like the skier, the snowboarders and skiers. They're not the easiest kids to deal with. I mean, they were kind of, if a lot of these resorts have a park, they call it, with all the like obstacles in the terrain park. They call it like the jumps. And like the kids that hang in the park all day they're like skateboard rats. Like they're kind of like and that's why ski resorts did it. They wanted to just stick them all in one place where they wouldn't bother anybody else. And Ryan wasn't really a park kid, but those kind of kids were, they were kind of highly respected at resorts if they were good at what they could do, and they could be a little difficult. And I was like, all right, like you're not that different than these kids. You've had a much, it's been unique, your childhood, your school experience. It shouldn't have gotten to that point, but you're a little like some of these kids. And I think, and it gave me sort of that idea. If I just left him in public to begin with, he would have been a pain in the butt for some public school to deal with, but he would have been fine. Like there was really no reason to do what we did, to try to fix him. And so I think he was meeting kids like that who, maybe they weren't the best students or maybe they weren't on the college track necessarily, but they were really good at what they did and they loved what they did and they were going to probably work in the industry. And so, I think it was the first time he saw, some of these we would go to different mountains and meet, ski instructors and guides. And a lot of them, when they told their story, they were kids like Ryan when they were little. They never fit in. They didn't think they, had much of a future. They found this thing and they ended up sort of making a career out of it. So that gave him another educational sort of plot point to say, yeah, I could maybe do this forever and make a living doing it. So a kid like that who probably felt hopeless because he looked, especially in our town where every kid was going to go on to med school, law school, or business school, and you get a lot of high achievers, and he had to feel like I don't fit in here at all. Now he's meeting these other kids, and they're saying, well, these guys all seem pretty happy. They might not make a ton of money doing what they're doing, but they love what they're doing, and I could do that too. So I think that played a part too.
The story itself is amazing. The book. Um, as soon as I opened it up, I realized, how different it is. The It's written from both of you. Tell everybody, in terms of that, what made you make that decision and why?
Yeah, so I was toying with how to do it, and And he had a book. Ryan's a big rock climber too. And it was an Alex Honnold, Free Solo. A lot of people watch that movie Free Solo on Netflix when he sort of climbs El Cap in Yosemite without any ropes, and he's sort of he's sort of reminded me a little bit of Ryan. And it was one of his books, I think. And I remember looking at it, and it was sort of like an author had sort of was like the narrator, and then the Alex Honnold, the climber, would sort of interject, his remembrance of that, that moment of that day. But he didn't really write the whole book. And I was like, all right, I knew Ryan couldn't write 500 pages or 300 pages, but I thought he could give me a good 100. And I was like, all right, if I can do the other 200, let's try that. And then the funny part, so we were eventually we end up in Antarctica. Is sort of how our travels culminate. We ended up doing this backcountry skiing expedition in Antarctica. And in Antarctica, you fly to Ushuaia, which is the bottom of South America, and then you take a boat over for about a day and a half, 2 days across the Drake Passage, which is like the roughest seas in the world. And we didn't have any internet or really anything during that period. And so we're just on this boat, kind of rocking and rolling, like bouncing up and down. And I said, and we were just killing time waiting till we got there. And I said, right, we always talk about writing this book. Like, what if we try, like while we're here, like just on our phones, like I'm just gonna start writing, and you start writing on yours. Like start writing your first recollection of the first school you went to or something. And he did a little bit of that, but I had more time on the boat where I was able to I just started doing like the first school, and I wrote like on my phone, literally. So when we get home, I kind of printed it out, and I was like, all right, I think this is going somewhere. And I write for like the next, probably a few months, and I had him do the same thing. And then I would give him a list and say, cover, this school, this school, this school, skiing at this mountain, this mountain, this mountain, and he wrote for about 4 months, 5 months. I did the same. And then at some point we swapped, and I wanted to see what he wrote, and he wanted to see what I wrote. And I loved what he did. It was really a first person account, and I didn't really have to change much of it. I mean, his recollection was so good about everything, and his attention to detail. And he hated what I wrote because I had spent 100 pages, and I was so angry about what happened, and so angry with the schools and the doctors and town. And I was like my revenge tour. I just launched into everybody. And so I had this really like bitter book. And he read it, and he's like, Dad, this isn't my story. Like I'm fine. Like I turned out okay. I don't want people to think like my life, is awful. And if it hadn't been for these things, I would be okay. That's not it. And I was like, you know what, you're right. And so I went back and I wrote for another few months, and I reached, some kind of like refocused the whole thing. I kept him writing. And so then at the end of that, we basically had, a few hundred pages. And I started to integrate it. And originally I thought we would talk about the same things, and our recollections would be so different. It would be interesting to see like how I remember things and how you remember things. But a lot of times we agreed, and so it kind of felt redundant. So then I was like, all right, I can't do it that way. Let's just make it chronological. And if his recollection is better or more interesting than mine, I'm going to cut mine out. And I just kept cutting mine out, cutting mine out. And so that's kind of how it played out. And his voice grew throughout the book. I think in the beginning, it's a lot of me because when he's little, it's me sort of narrating the story to get us to the first school, the second school, the third school. And then by the end, the epilogue and in the last chapter is really him, and that's the way it should be because it's his story, not mine. I made a lot of parenting blunders, I think, to put him where I put him, and through skiing and being stubborn and not giving up. I think I helped him dig out a little bit, but he did the work. I mean, he dug himself out, and he put himself where he is today. And it's too, half, I think the next phase of his life, going to college, and when he really started to travel alone to ski places and rock climbing, like that's pretty interesting too. But I had to end it at some point, so we sort of ended with high school. And we start showing it to we start showing it to friends, and everybody tells you it's good, but I never really thought it was great yet. And then we start pitching agents. You have to pitch an agent to get published. And before that, I was doing research on how do you get an agent, and I was like, God, this process is so convoluted, and every agent had different criteria. And so I went on LinkedIn, and I did a couple of searches for editorial consultants or something. I forget what the term search that I used, and I found this woman who helped us sort of through the process, but she also helped edit the book, and she was a really good editor. She was the first person who looked at. We had a lot of descriptive stuff, and then she would say, that should be a conversation. Like, what did you say? What did he say? Or what did that guy say? And I hadn't really written dialogue before, because I'm not really a professional writer. So I went back and I try to make it in dialogue is just it's just a lot, it just flows a lot better. So she really helped us get to that next level. And then we pitched agents and we got an agent pretty quick. And then from there, the agents pitched publishers and we got picked up kind of right away, which is, it's probably 10,000 to one shot to get published. And we were just, I think it was the right place, right time. It's a good story. And there was an outdoor publisher, Falcon, who really likes those kind of stories. And I think they were the right publisher for it. My only misgivings, I guess, I think it's more of a parent. You tell me because you've read it. It's more of a parenting story than it is an outdoor sort of adventure story. So I feel like we lost some people in the marketing a little bit that I kind of wish we had gone after a little harder because I really would love, especially any parent would benefit, I think, by reading it, but certainly any parent with a kid that's struggling. I mean, I wish I could get them all. And I think sometimes people look at it and they're like, "Oh, I don't ski," or that's not for me. But the skiing's almost a metaphor in some ways, I think, to the crux of the story, which is, how easy it is to blow it as a parent and how, lucky I think I was to kind of figure my way out of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it does say at the bottom how skiing saved my son's life.
Right.
The
Yep.
what I can tell you is that what I've gleaned from it so far, even before talking to you and hearing your story in person, as we have so far on the episode here, but there a couple things jump out to me. First, to me, this is a overcoming adversity and a story about advocating for your kids. And I think that now, of course, that's much more prominent than it was back when you had to do it and deal with it. When you were doing it, there was no big movement or big acceptance about advocating for your kids because they were like, "Oh, he's crazy."
Yeah.
Just take the medicine you're supposed to take and
Yeah.
just go to the place you're supposed to go and shut up,
Hmm.
right? And I
Hmm.
got that loud and clear from the book, just from sitting here and reading it. Um, the other thing that comes through really clearly in the book, and I want to say this, that two things. The first is there's a ton of regret in there from you.
Yep.
And even today, I've heard a ton of that. There's also a whole ton of how grateful your son is for what you did for him. And I think those two things together make it, not only worth reading, but hard to get through.
Yeah.
And the thing that kind of kills me is, as a dad, we do the best that we can, no matter what. And it's so clear that you were just simply trying to do the best you could. And when you got educators and administrators and doctors and everybody else all lined up saying, this is what you do, you don't know to question it at first because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
You can look back on it now and go, man, I made a mistake here and I should have done that. And, I mean, Robert, I got to ask you, father to father, man, what were you supposed to have done different, man, at the time?
That's a fair question. And I think, you know, part of it was this region that we live in, Boston in particular. You've got some amazing colleges and universities and hospitals. So, when you walk into an office and somebody has three diplomas from Harvard hanging on, back of their desk, like it's easy to say, all right, they must know more than I do, right? They have to. But then, I get to that point and I'd say to my wife, the second we walked out of that office, somebody else walked in. Like they're not laying awake at nights thinking about our kid. Like they're, in the moment they're giving you the best advice that they can, and that's what their job is. But they're not bleeding it like we're bleeding it, and they're not seeing every moment like we're seeing. So maybe we know more than they do, and then that was a hard one. I think, particularly with my wife, was sort of a, pedigree mattered, right? It was, I think that education matters here, and she's a lawyer. So if you walked in and said to her, I think you're wrong about this, she knows more than you do about, corporate law, and she's going to tell you that, and that's her job. And I think it was natural to assume that, when it comes to medicine or doctors or schools, people we weren't teachers, we weren't doctors. They must know more.
Right.
And so that was a mistake that I had to eventually overcome. And I think I did. I think skiing helped with that because I was seeing him in a different light than everybody else, and that was a big thing. But listen, I I can blame everybody, but when I wrote the book and I had to really process it all and doing a lot of, shows like this and really thinking and talking and trying to sort of talk through why I did certain things, there was a part of my personality that I had my expectations for him played a role. I wanted him to be better than me, and I wanted him to be perfect in a lot of ways. And if that pill could fix him or that school could fix him, I was all too willing to listen. So there was a part of me that I have to own and say, you know, when your kid really struggles and you get to that point where you forget about all that stuff. But I always think to myself, if Ryan hadn't had any of these issues and he had been a traditional student, I might have been not a lousy father, but I might have he may have been in therapy talking about me because I would have really he would have played on every club team and we would have traveled and I would have been that guy behind the backstop like biting my hands, if he made it out, because I wanted him to play at Division 1 and I could only play Division 3 and he's going to be better than me and I see some of that in how I parented my daughter because she was a typically developing kid and I coached her in softball and travel and I was you coached. I was harder on her than I was the other kids because I didn't want any of the parents to say like you favored your
Right.
kid. And we can laugh about it now because I realize that I recognize that because of the experience with Ryan. So I think, you know, we're people. We're just, you don't get handed a handbook. All of a sudden you have kids and all of the shit you went through, gonna say shit, in your
Yeah.
childhood, how you became who you are, and in a lot of ways fueled success. Maybe these little quirks about us, played a part in parenting him. And I think, part of just letting it go, letting all those expectations go, and being outside and in nature the skiing is a really wonderful environment to, it's you just up the top of the hill and you got to make it down, right? And there are people who can do it better than you. There are people who do it worse. It's dangerous. There's risk. There's thrills. It's exciting. It's cold. It's I don't know. There's something about it, and it's just that it's baseline. It's just the pure, enjoyable activity that you can share with people. And I think I don't know. It mellowed me. It did something. It made me recalibrate how I look at life. And listen, if my daughter got into this school or that school, I do feel that still, like, still want that sticker on the back of the windshield. And if and we live in a world where we measure success with money, and it's hard to lose that entirely, but I think I have in a lot of ways just kind of recalibrated and said, like, what's really important, and when your kids are healthy and happy and you're healthy and happy, then that means a lot more, and it changed me.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Do you think you're ever going to be able to give yourself a little bit of grace on this, or are you just going to keep pounding on yourself
Everybody asks me. That's funny.
till the
I
end?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why. He doesn't blame me. He's sort of, when he's asked, he talks about how the great father I was and how he owes it all to me. Like, he says all those things. I don't know why I can't hear it. I harp on, what I did wrong. I think that's my nature. I was as a baseball player, I'd get 3 hits and make one out, and I'd lay awake at night thinking about the out.
Yeah.
Like I just maybe the way I'm wired. But I'm in a good place about it. I think he and I are really close, and my daughter and I are close, and I'm lucky in that respect. And they're close. I mean, and they Abigail had a much different childhood, and Ryan, I think, commanded a lot of the attention of us, and there's some resentment there, but they're close, and that's important as well. So I'd like to think I'm getting there, but you're right. I do still kind of harp on those mistakes. I don't know why.
I get it. I do get it. I understand. All right. I've got a couple comments I'm going to say for the end, but let me give you a shot. As we kind of wrap things up here. Of course, we'll sum things up about the book in just a minute. But is there anything so far that that I haven't asked you about, or we haven't touched on, or maybe we did touch on it? You want to drive it home a little more, even just to leave behind all the
Yeah.
above. Why don't you take a few minutes where the floor is yours? Make sure we've covered everything and go for it.
Yeah. No, thanks for giving the opportunity. So when the book got published, right away, people would find us, and I'd get these emails out of the blue and texts or Facebook message. I'm a dad. I'm 43. My son is 8, and he's having all these issues, and he's bounced to this school and that school, and can you help me? And then it was, the first few times it was overwhelming because uh, I didn't know what to say. I knew what I can always tell when people are doing the wrong thing, and I could tell them kind of like, don't do that. But it's hard to sort of advise people and say this is how you should parent your kid after the 4 paragraph email because I don't know if the advice I could give is will translate. But I've tried to come up with some just some staples, right? And I think one is if you're especially these kids that will say have issues in some way if they're passionate about anything, if there's something that they really enjoy doing, and it can be, from music to sports to art to, whatever, it makes life a lot easier. I think it gives them a reason to get out of bed every morning. And a lot of these kids have a lot of depression and anxiety, and it's hard. And that advice I'm now seeing applies to even the most typically developing achiever kid because the world they live in with social media and the pressure to the pond that they live in when we were kids you wanted to be the best player in your town, right? And that was like the goal, right? Or the smartest kid in your class. They exist in this infinite pond where they compare themselves all day long to people they'll never meet and maybe aren't even real. And then they feel inferior all the time. So again, the same advice I think works if there's just something that they feel good about doing. It really helps. Two, you hit on it, you know your kid better than any expert. And it's really easy to trust, the doctors and trust these, especially when it comes to, decisions like medication and some of these other things. It's hard to say no. It reminds me a little bit of, when when we were kids and all of a sudden, or we became parents, every kid was going to get snatched from a park, right, by a stranger danger,
Right.
and and you realize how statistically how ridiculous that is. But you never wanted to be the one. So it's not like you were going to say like,
Right.
okay, just go out and yeah, fine, you'll be fine. So, we did worry, and I think that's with doctors. If a doctor says, hey, your son or daughter should take this medicine, and God forbid you say no and something happens, it's really hard to say no. But do the research and be sure. And what the one thing I would hang on to with meds when I was with Ryan, I knew when he turned 18 or 21 or when he wasn't going to take the stuff. And so I would say to my wife, even if it's helping him now, like it's not teaching him how to deal with life down the road because he's not going to take this stuff when he gets older. So we might as well just see what happens now. And so I think that there's an element of that. Ryan describes in the book when he was taking a lot of these meds, it was to make him not feel anger or sadness. But what we didn't realize it was muting his ability to feel happy. So he just existed in the scaffolding or he was just like in between this world where you never experience like life in its colors, bright colors. And he said even when he was skiing, like it was always good, but there were times he just never really it was overwhelmingly good for him, which was kind of hard to hear. And I think that's part what people miss. I think when it's just so easy to dole out the pills because it does help the other stuff. It will limit your ability to feel sadness and anxiety. It clearly does help with that, but there's an offsetting principle to that. So I think those are kind of the overriding things, and trusting your gut, and it's okay to be wrong and learn from your mistakes too. I think a lot of times as parents you have this sort of set principles and you're going to stick to them. But if you have multiple kids, like or coach, like you don't coach kids the same, right? There's some kids, and I remember I would tell I coach girls, and it was easier to say, there's some like girls are pretty good. Like when I coach boys, I think there are some kids you got to kind of be harder on. Like they kind of relish it. They want you to to challenge them. And I think with girls, I learned early on when I coached, none of them really need that. They just want to be treated, with respect and nice, and they know when they screw up. You don't have to tell them. And so I think with kids like that, you learn like some of your kids. need to be pushed more, and some kids really need to be propped up more. And I think that's it's important to sort of figure that out, especially with the first one. The first one's hard because you don't have anything to compare it
Right.
him to, and you're really kind of relying on your instincts. And don't compare yourselves to the neighbors and their neighbors' kids. And like baby number one comes, and all of a sudden he held his head up, he's not sitting up. Oh my God! Like it's like they all end up doing all this stuff, and it gets there on its own, and if you try to rush it just gonna make you crazy. So those are my parenting lessons. I try to spell those out in email with people when they reach out. Mostly I tell them to call me on the phone, and I try to tell them that it's gonna get better. And I've had people that continue to email, and it's hard when it doesn't get better because there are kids that, and I see that they're gonna go through some period of suffering, and this school stinks and that school was a disaster, and he quit the band, and we thought that was his thing, and now what do we do? And it's I wish it was easy. It's never easy, even when
Right.
you think they're easy. There's always an underlying tension with these kids. It's really hard. It's a hard world for them, and you've got to keep your eyes open. I think even when you think there's nothing wrong, you never know. So I hope people, will take those lessons from the book. And if nothing else, the book should offer some hope because Ryan was in as deep or dark a hole as there was for a kid to be in. And as a family, we were in as deep and dark a hole as we could ever be in. And, somehow we made it out. And not only made it out, but, follow Ryan on social media. He's Ryan DeLena or Extreme Ryan. He's a fun follow on YouTube. He leads this great life. He basically lives in a van now with off and on with his girlfriend. He travels around, skis and rock climbs, and he's he's a very well known skier. He's getting to be a pretty well known rock climber. You know, we'll find a way to make a living on those two things. We're getting there, but he's happy, and that's the best thing. And he's a great kid, and he's gonna be a great adult. So yeah, there's always hope.
Sounds like he's out there living his best life right now, man.
He really is. No, life is pretty good on Planet Ryan. That's what I say.
There you
He,
go.
but he doesn't ask for a lot. Like he's been given a lot. I mean, he's had a lot of opportunities, and he knows that. He feels guilty, I think, about that sometimes. But he's not the kind of kid that needs the new iPhone every year. Or he never asks for clothes. He barely, you know, his personal hygiene is questionable. I mean, he's not a kid that needs a lot of of the fancy stuff. He just really wants these opportunities to travel and experience things. And he'll sleep in a van and not shower for a week if it means being somewhere cool. And it's hard not to help with that because in the end he's not asking to stay at the Four Seasons, put it that way.
Right. It sounds beautiful, actually. Sounds like he's having a blast.
Yep, it's pretty cool. Definitely. No, it is very cool.
I love
He's
that.
in, he's in Canada right now. I don't even know where he is. He's skiing like hut to hut, and they sort of they climb up, ski down, and then there's some hut system in the Chick-Chocs. I don't know. There's the mountain range in Canada of Montreal. I never heard of it. And apparently, he said he'll be out of contact for 6 days. So it tells you as a parent, like there's a kid that they wouldn't let go to the water fountain when he was in school. He's somewhere in Canada for the next 6 days. I don't even really know where he is. So and it's gonna be okay. So parenting's come a long way.
I think in the end you did your job.
Thank you. That means a
Yeah.
lot. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
I think you did.
Thank you.
I wanted to address one last thing kind of on our way out here. We all want our kids to be better than us, and you just said those exact words. And frankly, I think he's got you.
Oh yeah, sure.
I didn't see this till today because I just started reading the book. So I didn't read any of this, or the inside cover till
Yep.
today because I wanted to make sure there wasn't something for the interview that I had missed. So today I'm sitting here reading this and I'm like, oh man. And it brought me to tears when I read it. And, we want our kids to be better than us. He's doing better than you are, my friend, because he has already forgiven you in writing and you haven't done that for yourself yet.
Thank you. That
So
means a lot.
this last line I want to leave with, and folks, this tells you everything you need to know about this book. This is from Ryan. The saddest part to my story is what happened to the kids I met along the way who weren't so lucky. Kids who would be doing just fine right now, but they're living in group homes or residential programs, all because some doctor or school administrator concluded that they were hopeless and their parents listened. Brother,
I'm glad you read it because I couldn't have read it without tearing up. I teared up years ago, and I've probably heard that 1,000 times. But yeah, no, it's compelling, and it's hard not to picture some of those kids we met along the way, and it's just through life, just bad luck, or they just didn't have you know a crazy dad, that was willing to keep going, I think, and kids with a lot of a lot of talent, a lot to be hopeful about that hope was stripped out of them, and then thank God Ryan, is doesn't feel that way, and is really, he's taken advantage of the second chance. I think means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, there's dads everywhere, man, that talk to me every day about how they just kind of wish that their sacrifices would be noticed once in a while, and things like that. And your your son just did it in writing forever, man. Um,
Yeah, thank you.
nice job,
Thank you. That
nice
means a
job.
lot. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you for being on. Robert DeLena, author of Without Restraint. Robert, thank you for coming here today, sharing all this. And I hope that everybody goes out and buys this book, and that when they're faced with a situation even remotely close to this with their kids, that they pay attention to what you did because you did it right.
I appreciate that. And reach
So,
out. I'm easy to find, and I love talking about this stuff. And I can't always promise that I can fix anything, but we can share in it together and hopefully help.
beautiful. Folks, you've heard Robert DeLena on the Power Man podcast. The reason that we bring powerful men like this with powerful stories like this to these episodes is so that you guys all understand that if people like Robert and Ryan can overcome the stuff that they're overcoming, folks, so can you. You got to believe it. You got to go out there. You got to give it your absolute best. You got to do everything you can, and at some point, you have to realize that you and yours have value, that you matter, and that you're worth fighting for. And at some point, you just got to believe it. Until next time.